something to show you a real camera for you to visualize more and appreciate the topic, but I'll do my best to explain it well to all of you. Next slide po. Objectives of the topic. Number one is the appreciate the importance of photography in preparation for the creation and designing a web. And next is identify the different kinds of photography. And number three is the recognize a good exposure photograph to a bad exposure, overexposed photograph. And lastly, create sorry po sa noise. And lastly, create a good composition photograph. Next slide. So let's proceed to the main topic, which is the concepts of photography. Photography is all about Photography is all about light. It is to let the camera see what you wish and to be able to let the camera capture what you've seen in your naked eye. Second slide. Next slide po. So let us know where the word photography came from. The word photography literally means drawing with light because it derives from the Greek word photos, meaning light, and graphos, meaning is to draw. Next slide. It is to define as the process of recording an image, a photograph on light-sensitive film, or in the case of digital photography, via a digital electronic or magnetic memory. Photography is the art of capturing light with a camera, usually like what I've said earlier via a digital sensor or film, to create an image in a cameras like the common ones that we've used like DSLR, Instax, Digicams, and even our smartphone. With the right camera equipment, you can even photograph wavelengths of light invisible to the human eye, including UV, infrared, and radio. In every camera equipment, you have tools controlling how much light reaches the camera sensor, which is the aperture and shutter speed controls. Next slide po. So when this tools was not correctly used, this will be the cases. As you can see here, there are two photos. The first photo, there is too little light on the main subject of the photo, which is the dog, the size of your pupil. So in photography, the pupil of your lens is called aperture. You can shrink or enlarge the size of the aperture to allow more or less light to reach your camera sensor. Next po. While the sensor is closed by a curtain, it is called a shutter. When the camera fires, the shutter opens and fully exposes the camera sensor to the light that has passed through your lens. After the sensor is done collecting the light, the shutter closes immediately, stopping the light from hitting the sensor. Um, Mr. Brian, can you please turn off your microphone? Thank you po. Um, so again, when the camera fires, the shutter opens and fully exposes the camera sensor to the light that has passed through your lens. After the sensor is done collecting the light, the shutter closes immediately, stopping the light from hitting the sensor. The button that fires the camera is also called the shutter or the shutter button because it triggers the shutter to open and close. Next po. When shooting, the shutter opens, light reaches the sensor through the aperture hole, and then it closes again. The longer the opening lasts, the more light reaches the sensor. This time, it is called the shutter speed. It is the length of time the camera shutter is open, exposing light into the camera sensor and how long your camera spends taking a photo. This has a few important effects on how your images will appear. It is responsible for two particular things, which is changing the brightness of your photo and creating a dramatic effects by either freezing action or blurring motion. Next one. Next. All of the above is achieved by simply controlling the shutter speed. In summary, quick shutter speeds freeze action while long ones create an effect of motion when you photograph moving objects. In this picture, next book. In this picture, you can see where it is placed, the aperture ring, the sensor, and the shutter curtain. Next. So now we already have a little knowledge on how a camera takes photos. Let us dig deep in more into the topic. Let's move forward to the DSLR camera structure. Next. When shooting, when shooting, your goal is to expose the right amount of light to the camera sensor. That is why it is called exposure. If you provide insufficient amount of light, the photo will be too dark. If you expose too much light, the photo will be too bright. The larger the deviation from the normal exposure is, the more chance you have to hopelessly lose image data. Software post-processing. It can fix the perceived exposure. For example, make a dark photo look brighter, like the tools that we were already familiar, like Adobe and Lightroom. But it cannot recreate the image data loss while shooting. Just like in these photos, let's go back to the last slide. For example, in the first photo, a very common landscape photography problem is losing clouds in a bright sky. When it is overexposed, too much light reaches the sensor. The whole sky becomes completely white and the clouds cannot be distinguished anymore. While in the second picture, with underexposure, which is too little light reaches the sensor, the shadowed parts of the image lose details, become completely black. Software cannot rescue such details because they do not exist in the original image. Thus, it is very important to get the exposure right when shooting. But what is right? Does it mean the photo must look so bright or dark? Simply no. What is right is the exposure must be such the maximum number of the scene details is captured by the sensor. So next po. Recording the visual information as much as possible. That's what is the camera is for. In fact, the best properly exposed photos often look terribly dull before software post-processing. Modern photo cameras often provide accurate automatic exposure evaluation, at least with a more or less even lighting. Their evaluation is usually great. In automatic mode, the camera suggests the excuse me. Sorry po. So proceed po guys. In automatic mode, the camera suggests the aperture and shutter speed values to use. They guarantees a good exposure, but are these really the best possible values? Next, please. Although the exposure is still the same and correct, this change can make a great difference in resulting photograph. Both aperture and shutter speed affect more aspects than just how much light reaches the sensor, and a photographer must always keep them in mind to get good results. However good your camera is, it is still unable to read your mind and thus to know what you want. So, um, in short, it is still in the skill of the photographer of what what will the photography results will result. Next is now let's look at the aperture and shutter speed in more detail and discuss their important side effects. As explained earlier, Aperture defines how large the hole is through which the sensor sees the world. In photography, aperture is measured in units called f numbers, which the smaller the f number is, the larger the aperture hole is. The more light reaches the sensor, so is vice versa. In practice, depending on the lens you have, you usually use f values from about f4, which is the large aperture, to approximately f16, which is the small aperture. Some quality lenses support much larger apertures, for example, Nikon lenses, which has 85 millimeters and 50 millimeters, gets to f1.8 or even f1.4. These are very light sensitive lenses will save you in a dark conditions. Next po, please. In addition to the amount of light reaching the sensor, aperture affects another very important aspect, which is the depth of field. Imagine several objects located at different distances from the camera. Say a five say a person 5 meters away, a bear 7 meters away, and a tree 10 meters away. The camera sees them all. But the question is, which objects are in focus? So the larger the depth of field is, the more objects are in focus. And the smaller the aperture, which is the larger the f number is, the larger the depth of field is. This is great for to get only the person in focus. Set the maximum aperture, such as f1.8. This is great for portraits with nice blurred backgrounds. To capture the whole scene, you also want the bare entry in focus. Use greater f numbers such as f8 or more. Note that aperture is not the only parameter affecting the depth of field. For example, the distance between the photographer and the subjects also plays a very important role. The closer you are to the first subject, the smaller depth of field becomes. Next, please. Next is the shutter speed. It is the time while the shutter curtain is open, exposing the sensor to light. Shutter speed is measured in normal seconds. At bright daylight, we usually use hundreds of a second. When cloudy, in shade, might be tenths of second. At night, it comes to full seconds. While the shutter is open, the sensor records everything it sees. It does not realize what the objects are. It just divides the scene into millions of dots and records the color of every dot during the exposure time. Imagine that it is quite dark and we are shooting a moving car at the shutter speed of 1 second. Next one, please. Back po sa last slide. Next na lang po. Yan ako. Imagine that it is quite dark and we are shooting a moving car at the shutter speed of 1 second. With a speed of only 50 km per hour, the car will move by almost 14 meters during this time. The sensor will see the car at the initial position at the first moment. Then the car will move to a place where the sensor previously saw only the background, and the sensor will now see only the background at the car's initial position, and so on until the final car position. What will be on the resulting photo? A 14 meters long semi-transparent car. Next one, please. Next. Again. Yan. The car we obtain is not sharp. It has what is called motion blur. The motion blur is the result of shooting moving objects with long shutter speeds. This is the shutter speed side effect you should always keep in mind. If you want to get a sharp object, make sure the shutter speed is fast enough to freeze its motion. If you want to get a motion blurred object to emphasize the movement, make make sure the shutter speed is slow enough. So go back to the last slide. Yeah. So this is the guide of the for the beginners who wants to master photography. Next, please. Lastly, in the three types of camera exposure, when you cannot get the right exposure with the aperture and shutter speed, it is time to think about the ISO sensitivity, or also called ISO speed. It defines how sensitive the camera sensor is to light. With the same amount of available light, the higher the ISO sensitivity is, the more light will be captured by the sensor. The normal ISO speed depends on your camera. It is either also called ISO speed. It defines how sensitive the camera sensor is to light. With the same amount of available light, the higher the ISO sensitivity is, the more light will be captured by the sensor. The normal ISO speed depends on your camera. It is either ISO 100 or ISO 200. This is what you start with. If you cannot get the right exposure by altering aperture and shutter speed, try to adjust the ISO speed. Aperture and shutter speed can reduce the amount of light as much as needed in most cases, with the rare exceptions. There are also other ways to reduce the amount of light, such as lens filter. The ISO sensitivity control is usually useful with insufficient light. When ISO 100 is not enough, try as ISO 200, ISO 400, etc. This is not so simple, however. Aperture and shutter speed controls can be considered safe because they alter and naturally measure the amount of light. The ISO sensitivity is more artificial. Its increase comes at a price. The more sensitive the sensor becomes, the more image noise it creates. This is when the equipment quality becomes important in photography. Expensive professional cameras usually allow much higher ISO speeds before the image noise becomes prohibited, just like in the next photo. Next slide, please. Next. Now that we already know what are the things that a photographer should master, let's move forward to 15 types of photography genres you can pursue as a professional photographer. Which type of photography should I master? That is probably the most challenging decision to make when you are starting to your pursuit of photography as a career. When you think of all the various subjects there are to capture and all of the different ways to create the image, the field of photography really is the dynamic and varied. There is something for everyone in photography, and the types of photography jobs are just as exciting. In today's social media connected world, many workers are taking photographs and sharing their experiences as part of their jobs. Next, please. And number one is the wedding photography. The first type of photography job involves wedding and events. Many people go their entire lives and only pay for professional photography once, but nearly everyone has a photography photographer for their wedding. It is pretty intense with an element of getting the best shot you can on the first try and not really getting a second chance in some situations. Next, please. Wedding photographers have to be quick on their feet, moving around during the reception and ceremony, and there are substantial sales and customer components to their jobs. They also have to be adaptable. ready to shoot outdoors on a sunny day and indoors for lit receptions and dances. Couples will expect the direction from the photographer for posing shots and settings. So the photographer must be confident and communicate well with the bride and groom. The great wedding photographers are the ones who love their jobs. Many beginning photographers start shooting weddings because, as they say, that is where the money is. But this mindset will ultimately lead to a disappointing business model if the photographer's heart isn't in their work. Next slide, please. And connected with the wedding photography, event photography is a dynamic and fast-paced way to make a or to earn money with your camera. Whether your beat is corporate events or wild and crazy rock concerts, event photographers work in a variety of settings. Event photography styles often involve a mixture of photojournalistic, documentary work, and portraiture. Some organizations use their event photos for publicity purposes, while others use photos as souvenirs or keepsakes. Next is portrait photography. Portrait photography is a great place to start out as a photographer. Building a great portfolio of quality shots can lead to more business. It can often lead to more work for families and weddings, as word of mouth marketing does its magic by recommending you to their friends or acquaintances. It can also lead to fashion and product photography. The photographer who takes portrait photography is called portraiture. Next slide, please. It is one of the most common types of photographer that we think of when we consider career options. These kinds of that can be included in portraits is amazing. The commonly customers of them was the retail customers who seeks out portrait photographers for every phase of life like maternity, newborns, school photos, senior photos, and general family photos. Also, the corporate employees who needs corporate portraits to update their headshots for websites and publicity materials. Next slide, please. Number four is the product photography. More specific than working in advertising, product photography is a great specialization. Think about all of the products you have recently shopped for. Everything needs to be photographed. The photos are used for online and print catalogs, as well as for labels and packaging. Most product photography is studio based, with careful control of background shadows and lighting. Studio rentals can be fairly expensive, so consider building a home photography studio on a budget. Product photography covers a lot of ground. Next, product photography covers a lot of ground, such as food photography, which is a specialized niche, and restaurants need to advertise their meals and create their menus. And also the jewelry photography. It is another favorite type of product photography since this requires the perfect balance of light and preparation. While some product shoots might involve models, many times you will be working solo in a studio doing still life photographs and of small objects. Next, please. Next one is the fine art photography. Of all of the types of photography, this is the one with no rules. Fine art photographers create art. They display their work in galleries and at art shows, and generally they sell a finished framed print product to their customers. Fine art Fine art photography can be of any subject at all. but landscape and portrait artists are probably the most common. Fine art images are about capturing emotional responses and communicating with the audience. As you can see here in the picture, um, the the photographer, which is Ben Levinwitzman, has his own website where he compiles all of his fine art photography. In that way, he can advertise his work to sell it with his audience, and at the same time, he is earning because of the site that he has in a way of using his pictures. And next slide, please. Next is the fashion photography. Fashion photography is one of the more glamorous and more difficult to enter photography jobs. From cover shots of the top fashion magazines to documenting the latest styles and trends on the runway. Fashion photographers work in the design districts of New York, Paris, and Milan. Runway shoots requires an element of next slide please. Runway shoots require an element of documentary photography, while post shoots on location demand on one-on-one work with the model. Catalog and magazine shoots might also occur on location from tropical beaches to subway. In this style of glamour photography, the look of the photographs is everything. Lighting must be perfect. This is a job that is also focused on the model. So a majority of the photographer's time is spent posing and directing models and scenes to get the look desired from the publication. Fashion shoots are all about teamwork, and they are done by a group of people. The photographer is just one cog in the wheel. Stylists, specialists, makeup artists, art directors, and others make up a team that keeps the shoot on track and make the magic happen. Next, please. Number seven is the architectural photography. While many find taking pictures of buildings to be a fun hobby, many specialized photographers make careers out of it. Architectural photography requires some special techniques and equipment to minimize distortion and perspective problems that become apparent on a building's many right angles. Employed by a architectural agencies or working as freelancers, these photographers capture the essence of building's form from inception of to completion. Detail, Details captured include the exteriors and interiors, and subtle details that make the building's design unique. A subdivision is a real estate photography. Realtors always need excellent photographs, especially in today's market where many customers view many properties online before deciding to go see them. High quality architectural pictures are difficult to get right, and realtors will pay for professional photos, especially in the high-end market. Next, please. And the next photography is the travel photography. Travel photography allows you to do just that while having fun with your camera in dynamic settings. Travel photography blends many different types of photography into one. On one trip, you might want to focus on the people and the lifestyles present in the place, while also capturing the landscape and the natural world in which it's located. Macro details and wildlife photography might be included too, be it on the beaches of Bali or the ice fields of Antarctica. The job of a travel photographer is to transport their audience to that place without them having to leave home. Next one is Av- Next one is the advertising or lifestyle photography. Everywhere we go, we are surrounded by photography. Photography is on billboards, street signs, magazine ads, even in our pockets on our smartphones. Captivating photography makes the advertising world tick, and photography has never been more in demand than it is right now. Advertising photography can include a range of subjects like street photography, lifestyle, fashion, or product. Advertising photographers can work as freelancers, selling images on a project by project basis, or they might work directly for major ad agencies. Either way, this is a dynamic field where you may be shooting for a print ads campaign one day and shooting internet ads the next, always with a new subject. Next, please. Number 10 is the photojournalism. Whether it be in a war zones, political rallies, or natural disasters or community celebrations, photojournalists cover breaking news. Newspapers, magazines, and online publications are all in need of still photographs to help tell their stories. Photojournalism is one of the documentary types of photography, and the goal of a photojournalist is to document the events as they unfold. While there may be some portraiture, the majority of work is done candidly and as unobtrusively as as possible. The photos tell a story of events that are happening all over the world. Next, please. Next is the pet photography. If your perfect subject is a fur friend, then pet photography might be for you. This is a growing sector and is very similar in working conditions and type of styles to portraiture. Only your subjects may require treats when they are good. If you love animals, then there is no better job as a photographer, since it involves a fun mix of studio sessions and outdoor and on-location shoots. With connections to your local pet daycare facilities and dog show circuits, you can build your business fairly quickly. This is a great way to start out is to volunteer your time to your local pound, taking pictures of the animals and helping them find their forever homes. Next, please, is the sports photography. If you love sports, then being a sports photographer is a great gig. Being a photographer, it uses quick cameras and long lenses to zoom in on the action and capture the winning shots. Photos wind up in publicity material for teams and in advertising and marketing and in the news media, online and in print. Next one, please. Aerial photography. A burgeoning, a burgeoning field of photography born from modern technology is the aerial photography. Aerial images have been around as long as manned flight and cameras have been. But today, unmanned aerial vehicles, also called drones, are making aerials within the realm of all photographers. In the US and most countries, commercial drone pilots must be licensed. The process is relatively simple and usually requires only a written exam. Aerial photography is now used for everything from architectural and real estate photography to weddings and events. The unique perspective given by drones can be beacon for uniqueness and beauty. Next, please. Next is the scientific or specialty photography. Many fields rely on great photography for publication, training materials, and record keeping. Many scientific and medical research companies employ photographers to document new findings and discoveries. Many other industries rely on photos to conduct surveys and studies. For example, in Florida, aerial wildlife studies are routinely performed to study the numbers of manatees and birds living in remote areas. Many insurance companies rely on photographers to inspect homes and buildings, sending their photographic findings to the company to document damage or condition. Next one, please. And lastly, the number 15 is the stock photography. If all of these types of photography jobs sounded good to you, you might make a great stock photographer. Stock photographers sell the rights to use their images through catalogs. They can work as a freelancer, but more often than not, photographers allow agencies to handle their sales. Stock sales usually don't pay very much per use, but the goal of a successful stock photographer is to have an extensive catalog of images that sell often. As a result, once the photos are uploaded and being sold, they provide a source of ongoing passive income. Next. The advantage of selling stock photos is that you can sell any type of image you want. These images are used by major ad agencies and small websites. Whether you like to shoot sunsets, people, kids, pets, or wildlife, you can probably sell your image You can probably sell your image as stock. Once the photos are captured, a lot of time is spent cataloging and keywording images to ensure that customers can find them. Next slide, please. That's all the types of photography that you can be mastered. I hope you've learned something from me. Thank you.
Okay, class, you have learned so many things about photography.